Hi, this is Charlie Zeiss from Stargate Pyramids. Today's video is entitled The Geometry of the Stargate Pyramid, Found in All Major Spiritual Traditions. I've been doing some research on Hindu temples, as some of you know, but I've now expanded that, and so I wanted to do a video to show you this geometry in 5 major spiritual traditions. So I'm going to open up the slide presentation now. Those 5 traditions are Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Judaism. And by way of comparison, I have a picture of the Russian pyramid from Russia and our version of our Stargate pyramid with the exact same geometry. So without further ado, we'll get started. We're using something called an MB ruler. It's an online protractor app that allows us to determine the slant angles of pictures where the geometry is pretty much straight on to the object. So just to show you the ability of this app, the Giza pyramid is supposed to have a geometry of 51.82 degrees. We're coming in at 5181. Here's the Russian pyramid. We've determined that geometry through our own research to be 76.345 degrees through geometry. And we're coming in with the protractor at 7634. Our own version of that same pyramid at 7635. So we're getting an accuracy within 1 to 200ths of a degree in most cases, if we are straight on to the object. If not, we're going to have a little bit more variation. But without further ado, let's get started. And we'll start with Christianity. We're going to start with a Christian church steeple here in the United States, 7636 degrees. Here's a large cathedral in France. This is not the Notre Dame that burned down in Paris. This is another Notre Dame cathedral, 76.34 degrees. A church steeple in Germany with this geometry, 7636. Here's a medieval Nordic church that exhibits the exact same geometry. This was built, I believe, around the 12th century. Here's a church, another church steeple in the United States. And here's an interesting object. This is a Justinian era Christian basilica located in Sabratha, Libya, which has the exact geometry of the Stargate Pyramid and the geometry of creation. And before we leave Christianity, I think it's interesting to note, although this is not a building, that perhaps the most famous symbol of Christianity outside of the cross itself may be the Christmas tree, which interestingly enough has a geometry which is a virtual match for that of the geometry of creation. Moving on to Judaism, here's a Jewish synagogue from Tehran, Iran, exhibiting this geometry. And here's one from Cologne, Germany, called the Roonstrasse Synagogue. You may not see it at first, but these 2 towers on top have that exact geometry of the Stargate Pyramid. Here's another synagogue from Sydney, Australia. If you'll notice, there look to be the equivalent of pyramids on top of the synagogue, which have the exact geometry of the Stargate Pyramid. Here's another Jewish synagogue in Kolkata, India, exhibiting the same geometry of creation, and another synagogue in Hungary. So, although not pervasive, the Jewish tradition does seem to have incorporated this geometry into their buildings throughout the world. Now we're moving on to Islam. We're going to see here a mosque in Madina, Saudi Arabia, again with a tower with the same geometry as that of the Stargate Pyramid. Here's the Islamic Center of America, which is the largest Islamic center in the United States, and it has 2 towers that have the geometry of 76.35 degrees. Another mosque in Sweden with, again, the 2 towers that have the same geometry. Here's one in Calgary, Canada, with the same geometry in the tower. And here's one in Sofia, Bulgaria, with the same geometry. Now we're going to move on to Buddhism. Here's some Buddhist temples. It's sometimes hard to find the geometry in some of the Buddhist temples, but if you look at the very top, you're going to find these in many of the temples in Nepal, Tibet, and northern India, and you're going to see that that geometry is 7635. Here's an example of a very famous monastery based in Bhutan called the Tiger's Nest Monastery, and once again you'll see at the top here these same kinds of pyramidal objects which demonstrate the geometry of the Stargate Pyramid and the geometry of creation. Here's a temple in Tibet, once again with these same pyramidal type objects at the top of the temple bearing the same geometry. And here's another one in Nepal. Here's a pagoda in our temple in Osaka, Japan, with the geometry 76.36 degrees. And interestingly enough, if you go to Disney World, you'll find a replica of a pagoda from Japan that bears the exact geometry, once again, of the Stargate Pyramid and that of the geometry of creation. Here's another pagoda from China using the same geometry. And here's a Buddhist temple in India with the geometry once again at the top, a northern Indian temple. Here's some more Buddhist temples, one in Sri Lanka bearing the geometry, another in Sri Lanka, and here's one in Thailand with the same geometry. Finally, we're going to finish up with Hindu temples, which was the original area of discovery for me. These Hindu temples, all both on the front and the sides, have the geometry of the Stargate Pyramid, 76.345 degrees. This is the Anamalayar Temple in Tiruvannamalai, India. It's dedicated to Shiva. The major temple in the complex, 76.35 degrees. Some of the smaller ones we measured 76.33. Here's the side view of one of the other temples at a 90-degree angle. So we're looking at it from the side, 76.34 degrees. So it's clear that the slant angle both from the front and the sides of these temples uses the same geometry. Here's the Rangadaswami Temple in Srirangam, India, the largest functioning Hindu temple in the world, 76.34 degrees. And one of the minor temples in that complex, 7635. Here's the Brahmaswarar Temple, Tirupattur, India, dedicated to Brahma. Again, the same geometry. If you're noticing, all of these pyramids in southern India called the Dravidian style are essentially constructed in the same fashion geometrically and contain the same geometry. Here again is another complex in southern India called the Meenakshi Temple in Madura, India. Again, the same thing, 7634 from the front, 7634 from the side. Here's some more temples, the Shore Temple in Mahabalipuram, India. That's a carved temple. And here's the Ramanshah Temple in India, Thanjavur Temple in India, Virupaksha Temple in India, as well as a couple of temples from outside of India. Here's one in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Singapore, and finally one in Houston, Texas. So as you can see, this geometry is pervasive in at least 5 that we've discovered so far, spiritual traditions around the world. This geometry has been known for thousands of years and is shared by all major spiritual traditions around the world. So when you start to think about pyramids and the significance of geometry, I think it's important for you to remember that all major spiritual traditions find this geometry in their architecture. You'll also find it in their headwear, which we didn't talk about today. So this isn't an accident. This is an interdimensional geometry, as we've talked about in other videos. This is the geometry of creation, as discovered by Marshall Lefferts. His term for it is the Phi Scaling Angle. All of these things point to an interdimensionality, a universality of this geometry, both in nature and in the spiritual traditions around the world. I hope this was helpful. As always, tell your friends about Stargate Pyramids. Subscribe to our channel to continue to see these types of videos. If you're interested in pyramids, this is the place to subscribe. We thank you for watching, and you have a great day.